Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. Last week, we said we were going to do a live podcast sometime early in the new year, and now we have a date and a place and a time. We are going to do a live version of the podcast. And we're going to be selling tickets for it and everything. It's January 15th in Washington, D.C. It's at the Eaton Workshop. If you're in the greater DC area, you can look up where that is. We don't have tickets on sale yet, and we don't have all the details about ticket prices and, the discount you'll get if you're a member and all that kind of stuff. But we wanted to tell you the date. If you're interested, hold that date. Again, where it's going to be, Eaton Workshop. We plan to put the tickets on sale early next week. And the way we'll do that is if you are a member, we're going to send all members an email with the details and the prices, a little link you can buy a ticket. I think there's going to be in the ballpark of around 200 tickets, something like that. I may have that slightly off, but that's the general idea. So again, if you are interested, keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, sometime early next week, you'll get it. We wanted to do that because, we know there's going to be overwhelming demand. So we don't want people camping out virtually in front of the TPM offices thinking they're going to get tickets and scalp them and everything. We're doing this totally, there's no Live Nation thing here, right? Totally by the book, email to you. So anyway, we really, really looking forward to it. We're looking forward to seeing you in DC January 15th, and it'll be a lot of fun. And again, we're gonna do more of these. I think we'll probably do one in New York sometime soon in the new year, and hopefully a few other places. We'll kind of figure that out as we go along. And again, really look forward to doing it. Look forward to seeing you. Looking forward to it'll be a kind of a different cadence, right? Doing it in front of a lot of people. Kate and Jackie, our producer, and I, we sort of we do these. We don't do it on Zoom, but we do it on a platform that's similar to Zoom, right? Because we're usually in different places, so we're used to that kind of very one-on-one, virtual one-on-one. So it'll be cool to do it in a different way. So Kate, what
I
are
would I
you
just
looking
wanted
forward
to
to? Yeah.
add Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick that I scoped out the space for our New York team. It's this really cool hotel. It's just like a few blocks away from the White House, and it has, you know, it's a one-stop shop kind of deal. So it has a lot of like event spaces and a little podcast recording studio and stuff. And it's right downtown. It's kind of in the heart of it all. So it'll be a good chance to have a little jaunt around DC, see the sights, eat the foods. I think it'll be a good time.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So keep an eye on your inboxes again, sometime beginning of next week. So Kate, the first thing we have on our menu of news edibles today is the Social Security and Medicare cuts. It's kind of this is something that is uh, I have a deep connection to as a news story, kind of close to my heart. It is one of the weird things about it to me, and it's probably going to be one of the features of this second Trump presidency is Trump has, you know, I don't know, delegated, empowered, created this Doge thing, which in a basic sense doesn't really exist. It's kind of a project or a shiny object that Trump gave Elon Musk as a thank you for spending about a $250 million on getting him elected, and it, a lot of what we're hearing, these promises of we're going to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from this and hundreds of billions of dollars that, it's all kind of tech bro talk, at many levels, and so it's a little hard to know sort of what's real and what's not. So what's your impression of what's going on this front?
Well, I don't know if you've seen the meme that's circulating that Brian Boitler used in his newsletter, but it's the a Scooby Doo antagonist being tied up, and with the mask on, it says "We're populous," and then the mask is off, and it says "Time to cut Social Security."
Right, right.
But I mean, it's what you're saying, right? Time is old, or tale as old as time. That they'll kind of like protest ferociously to wanting to do this when Republicans are in the minority. There's that clip of Mike Lee at the State of the Union where Biden says they're going to cut it and he's like aghast, and then he just put out a thread this week about how Social Security is a quote Ponzi scheme. So, this is it's funny because in some ways this was felt like a clash of kind of old Republicans and new Republicans because this kind of like austerity cutting entitlement stuff. I mean, it's Paul Ryan
Very
stuff.
Paul
It
Ryan. Yep.
feels
Yeah.
like of a Republican Party that is kind of bygone up until this point. And that's also been encapsulated in Trump, who we'll see sometimes demonstrating like true political savvy on stuff, especially stuff that he doesn't care about, but he recognizes that it's politically toxic. And this is definitely one of those areas for him. So it's funny to have it kind of this issue be dragged back up again because you have Musk and Ramaswamy who know so little about even like recent political history that they don't even seem to kind of recognize that they're not the first people to think of this and that it's got a really storied history of being the third rail in politics that has, thwarted earlier iterations of Republican attempts to cut these programs. So it is kind of, it's funny how it's all coming to a head in this way. And it is also the inevitable conclusion when you've got Musk going around saying, well, I'm going to cut $2 trillion from the government. I mean, how many times have we run into this before? There's just not that much stuff to cut before you get to these programs. So in terms of, I want to hear from you on this, Josh, since you've covered so many iterations of this fight before, but in terms of the kind of like, can it actually happen type thing? I think, it seems to me that there are different buckets of risk here, that Social Security is probably the least at risk just because of the logistics of how you have to change the program. You famously can't do it through reconciliation, so you would need to go through regular order. And considering how slim the House margins are, I mean, it seems pretty remote, which seems to me to put programs like Medicaid in particular, because it's got a reputation that Republicans hate so much. Like it's the quote unquote like welfare queen hub kind of thing, which can be, Medicaid and Medicare and veteran benefits, all of that can be touched during reconciliation. So in terms of risk, those things, particularly Medicaid, seem to me to be the kind of like front line, programs to be concerned about if this leaves the atmosphere of like Mike Lee approvingly getting quote tweeted by Elon Musk about it.
Right, right, right. Well, I think there's, there's the political spectrum, and then there's the legislative spectrum, as you say. One thing I want to start out with is that in in you know in the world of Washington, as you know, the cliche that it's the third rail of politics, and that is often used as, almost like the way that you can't use swear words because, everybody wants to, but it's just a little too hot. This idea that it's the third rail, and what everybody knows you need to do, you just can't do it because it's too hot to handle. And it's worth stepping back and saying, No, it's just people like this program. It has been deeply woven into American society for going on a century now, right? It goes back to the origins of it in the early 19th century. So it's super popular. I agree with you that it is ultimately uh, the hardest to go after to start with, political reasons. Medicare is a close second, but it's a little, I mean, it's not like more people are fine with cutting Medicare than cutting Social Security, but the nature of the program, and the way that health insurance is fundamentally different from social insurance and cash support makes what is a cut and what's not a cut a little fuzzier, right? We have in the last, I don't know when Medicare Advantage started exactly. I think of it as something 20, 30 years, probably 30 years ago, um, where you can opt to have some of your Medicare administered by private insurance, and that is subsidized and everything. The point with Medicare is it's a little squishier. There's ways you can kind of cut it and say you're not cutting it, sort of. And then, as you say, you have Medicaid, which is always been, treated in American politics as basically welfare. It's healthcare welfare. So why, people should be happy if they get it at all. Who's complaining, and all of that, and that that is why it is, for advocates of Social Security and Medicare, it's always been such a big deal to make them universal, because you don't have that. I do think there is one difference, though, and that is, and I hope Democrats are starting to realize this. It's not so much a technical difference as a political difference, and that is that a huge part of what the Affordable Care Act did was dramatically increase the eligibility for Medicaid. That's a huge part of what the Affordable Care Act is, Medicaid expansion, where you create these, uh, what are they called? These exchanges where you can buy private health insurance with subsidies, and then just a lot more people are eligible for Medicaid. So to me, what is really important about that is that Medicaid is now functionally part of the Affordable Care Act. I'm sure I'll get some policy people saying, "Well, not really, not a, well, no, stop." It is. It is a huge, Medicaid is a huge part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And that is now, strange as it would have seemed a dozen years ago, a very powerful brand. It's almost up there with Social Security. No one wants to say they're going to touch the Affordable Care Act. So if to the extent that, and it certainly, I mean, this is the one part of the equation. Whether Musk and Ramaswamy are going to get in on, these massive cuts to Social Security and Medicare is one thing. But on the Medicaid front, the Republicans are saying pretty clearly that's where we want to get the money for the tax cut. So that's already like, you know, in the fine print. Um, but that to me is the sort of, I think you laid out the mechanics of how you do this is different on Capitol Hill with reconciliation and all that kind of stuff. But that to me that's the political lay of the land. And I think the political lay of the land, again, especially on Medicaid, is a little more favorable than I think some political types understand. Because again, it's functionally part of the Affordable Care Act. If you're cutting Medicaid, you're cutting the Affordable Care Act. That's just how it is.
Right, which Trump has had more of a passion for than he has a passion for cutting the we need a better word than entitlements to call all these things because that's such
Social insurance. I mean,
political language.
that's
Yeah,
the original. So these are social insurance programs. That was the original word. Um, Entitlements were sort of had I think have their origins as a technical definition within government speak, but then it was basically taken over by the center and center right as like entitlements. You're
right,
entitled. It's all the
right.
negativity behind that.
So, whereas Trump doesn't seem to have any particular hunger to cut the social insurance programs beyond that he has kind of like Heritage Foundation people talking in his ear about it, we know that he has real animosity towards the Affordable Care Act for the probably really simple reason that, it's Obamacare, right? And he doesn't like Obama and he likes the idea of taking down this big thing that Obama did that's become really popular. Um, Obviously, that was one of the only things he did last time he had the trifecta was try to repeal it, and we all famously know how that went down. But in terms of trying to wrap our heads around how far this meeting of the minds between the Heritage Foundation types and the, nouveau right will go, the affordable care piece is so interesting because that's the only way I can see Trump at all, like, raising any interest in this. But then he was kind of asked, he did this extremely long interview with Kristen Welker on NBC. It was like an hour and a half or something, which, generally people of that kind of stature in politics don't have that kind of time to just shoot the shit. But they got into a lot of this and she brought up the famous kind of concepts of a plan type thing, but he wasn't very aggressive about it. He was like, "Oh, we got to look into this and see how things are working." And, it didn't seem to have a lot of kind of the vitriol that he reserves for stuff that he actually is pretty engaged in. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything one way or the other because I think we all kind of know, for instance, Trump doesn't really care about being anti-abortion, but he recognizes that it's important for his movement, so he'll kind of
Yeah.
like acquiesce to whatever they want. So that'll be a kind of a big test here to see to what degree he's willing to kind of do what the powers that be in older Republican politics want him to do, and how much that will clash with his inherent kind of political instincts that, oh man, the people who really like me might not like this much at all.
Yeah, the sort of the tripartite nature of it, which you just explained, is really fascinating, and I think may get fairly kinetic. Where, as you said, old time Paul Ryan Republicans, cut, 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 all that thing which we know about. The Musk stuff, which is more this kind of move fast and break things. uh the state is the it's not even the deep state. The administrative state is preventing us from doing all the cool things, so we need to break it. So those are not the same things exactly. And some of with with Ramaswamy and whatever, a big part of it is that they're realizing that if you want to cut $2 trillion, the budget is basically defense, Social Security, and Medicare. That is the federal budget. You toss in debt service, and that's kind of, then you're down to, like, I don't know what, $1 billion or so. It's you're down to just the ordinary fixing the potholes in the roads. So to some extent, they've got themselves all jazzed up about $2 trillion, and some of this isn't it, in addition to it being move fast and break things ideology. It's also okay, wait a second, we're going to have to cut a few $100 billion here, because where else are we going to get it? And meanwhile, you have Trump, and Trump's big thing is always like, for the people who like him, he's not here to bring you pain. He's not a pain guy. No pain. Everybody's going to get, I mean, nice, 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 shiny things. And that's kind of, here you get the sort of, the, the continuity back to his life as a real estate promoter. No one's saying that kind of like you need fewer square feet. That's not how it, that's not how it goes. So how these things all mix together, I have no idea. But I mean, as a political matter, if your opponents are saying something, are going out there and saying things that are super unpopular, you jump on that. Why they're saying it, who cares? Who cares why they're saying it? And to a certain extent, who cares whether it's going to happen? But it's not really that cynical because things can happen out of the blue, right? You don't want to, you hear something like this being discussed, you want to put up a really big wall to block it. And if it was all a false alarm, okay, fine. And that's kind of where I think we are. Let me ask you this: from being up on the hill, from there's obviously what Musk and Ramaswamy are tweeting about and all that kind of stuff. But do you have the sense that the legislators on Capitol Hill, the senators, the big House members, do they think that things like big Social Security cuts and Medicare cuts are actually going to come to them? Like that they're actually going to have to deal with this, or is this just kind of nonsense on Twitter to them?
I mean, there's a coterie of people who are excited about this and talking about it a lot, but honestly, it's so confirmation right now that
Right,
I don't even think people are really thinking ahead to this
right,
necessarily,
right,
or
right,
saving
right.
this fight for another day. But I think we said this on a prior podcast in terms of what you just said about the messaging, go after it, whether it's going to happen or not. I mean, it couldn't be any easier, right? He wants to cut rich people's taxes and he's going to pay for it by taking away your health insurance. Like, bim, bam, boom. It
Yeah.
doesn't kind of come any easier package than that. One thing that occurred to me, which is just a lingering kind of what a shame type thought, is that having this stuff bubble up at the same time that we just had um, the assassination of the United CEO. If we lived in a different world, like if Democrats had won a trifecta, you could so easily see that reigniting the 2020 primary debates, right? Where like the number one topic of those primaries was healthcare reform, which is almost like
Hmm.
shocking to think of now. I don't know, even though it was only a few years ago, but it just feels like whenever Trump's involved in politics, they get so like stupid, and there's never any space to talk about interesting policy questions like how to make healthcare better. It's all just is he not a fascist, whatever. But
Hmm.
I don't know. You can imagine if they'd won this trifecta that we would be having a very different conversation about healthcare and about, Medicare and what the future could look like, and taking all this like discontent about private health insurance and channeling it into momentum. But now, I mean, this is the Republican regime, right? We're kind of left to debating will what we have now, what paltry kind of services we have now kind of survive the next 4 years.
Now, is when you say there's a coterie of people on the Hill who are kind of jazzed up about this, are we basically talking about the Mike Lee and Mike Lee adjacent types? These
Yeah,
kind
and
of
then some kind of
the
equivalents in the house, yeah.
right, and a lot of those folks, or Mike Lee specifically, is basically sort of core heritage type who
Mhm.
has sort of rebranded him as you know I don't know, laser eyes, you know, online dude kind of thing. But he's really a heritage type who has who has done a semi rebranding to kind of come up with the latest fashion.
Totally. I mean, and there are a lot of those, right? I mean, even as Congress has gotten, or Republicans in Congress have gotten Trumpier, particularly in the Senate, it's still, they're old heads, right? They've been there forever. They're like more kind of crafted in the mold of this old school heritage Republican. But I also think 2017 wasn't that long ago. And people really threw in with that and got pretty badly burned. I mean, it's got to be the biggest humiliation for Republicans in Congress in the
No,
Trump era.
absolutely, and it's also I can't remember that people have tracked public opinion about Obamacare over the years, and I think it only became sort of like net popular in like 2019 or something like that.
Hmm.
I may have that slightly wrong, but I guess the relevant it obviously took a very long time, and I think that when it went down in 2017, it was it was still basically a wash in terms of popularity, but sometimes you can have some this is where people often get thrown off by public opinion polls, is that something can be a wash in public opinion, but if the people who like it are the right people and feel it strongly enough, right? That can make all the difference. And that's kind of where it was. And one of the, a friend of mine who I was talking to recently, who lives in one of the Trumpiest parts of the country, but is a Democrat, but really has an eye into the rural, um, generally fairly poverty stricken parts of the country, poverty stricken, lower middle class, economically stressed places, that are extremely Trumpy, but that the Affordable Care Act is now like, it's just a kind of a core component of life, right? You go on the exchange, you see what your subsidies are going to be, and that world was clearly already coming into view in 2017. Like, I remember one of the things I remember from then was a town hall that I think Tom Cotton did, and somewhat like West Virginia, Arkansas is really a prototypical Trump transition state, in the sense that it was always fairly culturally conservative, but it was pretty democratic. And now it is 100% Republican, right? But you still, but the political economy of that place, that people rely, the Trumpiest people in those areas rely on Obamacare. Um, that's a big thing, and it's there's so many things. To a certain extent, maybe he just, the Obama thing is just not on his. He's all Mueller and Biden and stuff. Obama doesn't matter as much, but there's just so many things that we've always known with Trump. A lot of things he just doesn't give a crap about. Like, I'm gonna take heat for cutting Social Security. Like, why? In his mind, he just, again, he wants to bring pain to the bad people, not his people. He's all joy, right? He wants to bring all goodies to his people. So the whole idea of these kind of cuts is politically crazy in his way of thinking about politics.
And I think how this goes down will just be a good signal the degree to which Trump is going to outsource his governing to these allied Republican bodies. I mean, and we've seen before that he'll do it in some places and he won't in others. Like when it came to the Supreme Court, he outsourced that completely to the Federalist Society and Heritage. But with other kind of old school Republican bugaboos, he just doesn't care. And he's not willing to like kind of
Hmm.
take on the heat for it. So let's talk about another thing that fits in this category, which is the birthright citizenship uh, issue, which, he was asked about in that same NBC interview. He said, yep, day one priority. She's like, all right, great. How are you going to do it? And he said, you can do it through an act of the legislature, but I'm going to do it through an executive order, which, Josh, you wrote about this, is being met with this weird kind of response on the left of whenever anyone is like, well, guess what? Birthright citizenship is one of the few things that's like written out quite clearly in the Constitution. He's going to have to amend it. That's obviously not going to happen. That people respond and are like, yeah, did you fall off the turnip truck yesterday? He's got the court and he's got Congress, and there's kind of nothing that can stop him. And I want to be sympathetic because I understand where it comes from, right? It was encapsulated in that famous tweet that was like, well, I'd like to see how Trump, slithers out of this one. And then it's like Trump slithers out easily. Oh, well, nonetheless, right? I mean,
Right.
we're kind of, this cynicism is coming from an understandable place that is so many of the, norms and institutions that we kind of expected to put the brakes on Trump didn't work, weren't executed fast enough, weren't executed well enough, whatever. That when you now rely on those things again, like, well, that's not what the Constitution says. I understand why people are rolling their eyes because the Constitution it says or implies a lot of stuff that the right wing like doesn't care about, and they do have judicial control. But even still, this is a bigger ask than some of the other stuff that he's asked of the Supreme Court. Like, he's asking them to kind of find a way to take what is just unambiguous in the text. There's no kind of textualism you can do here where you're like, no, that's not really what it means, right? Like the way that they're trying to do this, Trump allies is to classify undocumented immigrants as an invasion and say they're an invading hostile power, and that's how you get around it. But that's ridiculous on its face. And even if they were to take that up, then you're left with the question of how do you execute this? How would the federal government like rescind citizenship or find the people who don't qualify? Not the least because you've got these people are promising to hollow out the government. So I mean, you've got this whole mix of stuff that makes it just virtually impossible for him to carry off, but you've still got like I mean, I know people are really disheartened after the election, but there is like a really big block of people on the left who are like, yeah, of course he's going to do it. Despite the fact that, we're falling back into our Teflon Don thing a little bit. Like he fails
Hmm.
all the
Hmm.
time, really routinely.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I don't I don't discount the possibility that he could get the Supreme Court to side with him on this. They've sided with him on other totally absurd, things where they've just made things up out of whole cloth. So I guess to me, it operates on a couple levels. That even if that is possible, even if that could happen, there is something uh, really off politically in the big sense of politics of just saying, okay, yeah, I guess you will. Well, okay, wait, let's back up. We're not gonna. It doesn't make sense to see the point that the Constitution is crystal clear. Maybe the Supreme Court will just say it's not. Like, okay, that could happen, but I'm not. But we shouldn't be ceding that ground. First of all, um, second of all, as you said, uh, the the federal judiciary, even the Supreme Court, there's different factions there who have different things they want to do. That also makes it hard. One of the biggest things I don't think anybody has really talked about is that birthright citizenship is the basis of all of our citizenship. In this, if if you could pass totally new laws and totally new constitutional provisions, we could do it differently. But the reality is, the fact that you are a citizen, Kate, is that now I'm pretty sure that both of your parents are citizens, probably go back a few generations. But the fact that you are a citizen actually rests in the fact that you were born here, because the hospital didn't ask for proof of citizenship from your parents, or when they first got you a social security number on stuff like that. It's the That is just the structure of how everything currently works. um so if you say that's no longer relevant, then kind of everybody's citizenship who hasn't been naturalized is kind of up in the air. Like, okay, so now we have a new system, Kate, where you're a citizen because your parents were citizens and when you were born and stuff. So it destabilizes the whole system in a pretty dramatic way. When you've got a country of like 350 million people, that actually ends up mattering a lot. That if you sort of, it's like you have you're playing Jenga and you just like take three pieces out from the bottom row, right? It's gonna throw things off. So in any case, it's this basic issue that I think we've been talking about a lot, that there are no guarantees. We do have a Supreme Court that is willing to basically kind of just rewrite the law when they want to most of the time. Um, but Trump has this way of opening up a lot of space just by asserting something. Yeah, I'm going to do it, and people want to give him that. And like, okay, well, not quite. Let's see him do it, because I don't think it's going to be that easy. It's a weird space to operate in, but here we are.
And the politics of it are interesting, right? Like there's a reason that Trump keeps saying this over and over, and it's because he thinks it plays in well to his immigrant fear mongering, right? And then he can tie it into all the rest of the kind of right wing ecosystem around this issue, which involves anchor babies and, you know, horrible people getting to stay because they, had their children here. And it's so like propagandistic in that way, because as soon as you move one step into the logistics, it totally falls apart, right? Like what do you do with the many millions of families where the children are citizens because they were born here and the parents aren't, right? And when he's asked about that, he says, well, the citizen children can either go with them or they can stay. Like, I mean, he's tiptoeing very close to deporting American citizens as part of this plan, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
and again, this all goes back to kind of also sussing out like what everyone's citizenship status is. I just think it's there's the political realm, there's the logistical realm, and then there's the democratic response, which is just baffling. Like, I know people are disheartened and bummed out right now, but the response just can't be like Trump, a famous liar, a famously incompetent president who got truly next to nothing done last time he had a trifecta. The kind of default posture can't be he's going to do it. There's nothing we can do about it. Like, oh, and you want people to vote for that side again? Like, come on. I mean, there's got to be a little bit of like chutzpah here and a little bit of figuring out a way to kind of communicate to people why this is like bad and stupid, that goes beyond just, well, it's in the Constitution. It's like, okay, well, we got to figure something else out, how to kind of market this and make it matter to people.
Well, it's also, the thing that is front and center in my mind is that birthright citizenship as a concept is not necessarily very popular at all, because
Mhm.
people think like, okay, someone came here illegally and now they're having like, no, like, why are you like, so it's not, it's this isn't Social Security. Social Security is super popular. No one wants to touch it. Everybody wants to get their payments when they're old. um it is it is a it's not necessarily an overwhelmingly, or if you frame it in a certain way, even a popular thing at all. It's more when you get down into the logistics, that so it's kind of one of those things. It's not like I don't think anybody thinks, and it would be hilarious to me if anybody did think like, don't come after our birthright citizenship. We're all down with most people don't even have any understanding of even what you're talking, what you're talking about. But and even you see this with Trump in a funny way, that in what I think it was in that Welker interview, at one point he he seemed to basically concede the birthright citizenship point, the constitutionality, but he basically said, they're citizens, but I'm just so against separating families, but I'm going to deport them just to be nice. Right? I mean, so they're this is all part of their "we're deporting everybody" thing, and they're sort of mixing and matching as they go. And again, I don't know if it was during that interview or right around the same time, but he also said, "And also we're going to take care of the dreamers." Well, what? Like, wait, what? you know, the dreamers are the archetypical birthright citizens. Their parents were here. Uh, I mean, they're even less than. Get this straight. They have a less basis for being here than the kids who were born here. But he's gonna work it out for them. So he's all over the place, and I don't think in being all over the place, he opens up opportunities for his opposition. And it's one of these things. I do think Democrats got a little off, um, bungled the immigration thing during Biden's presidency to a great degree. But when you get into actual American citizens being deported, I don't think people like that. And they especially don't like little kid citizens being deported.
Right, which is why I think like this is a good opportunity too for Democrats to kind of find the center on immigration again, right? Like over Biden, it became this thing they were so cowed on, right? That they wouldn't even like push back or kind of fight. Like we are so far gone from a Democratic Party with a clearly articulated view of like the benefits of immigration, and the really distinct harms that would come from booting out a huge a huge amount of them. They kind of done a Republican light type thing, and that's where an uneasily Republican light type thing where they're like, yeah, we got to crack down on the borders, but it's kind of like mealy mouthed and doesn't have a lot of conviction behind it. So I think birthright citizenship is also like a good opportunity for Democrats to kind of practice getting more comfortable talking about immigration and connecting it really explicitly to the family separation stuff of Trump's term. Because I know we all have Nat like memories now, but that was one of the darkest chapters of Trump's presidency, and not dark for like people who didn't like Trump, dark for everyone. I mean, seeing images on TV of like little kids under those space blankets lying on the floor of cages, like that was disturbing to everyone but his most kind of like hardcore xenophobic fan base. And
Hmm.
when you take birthright citizenship to its natural conclusion, you're left with a similar situation, like families that are rent in half and children being asked to stay in the US alone or kind of go to a country they may have never been in. I mean, it's the same as the cutting the social insurance programs, right? It's like you can say these kind of one-off soundbitey stuff, but as soon as you take it one more step, there's all the really evocative human suffering that comes out of these policy positions. And so I think it's a good opportunity for Democrats to start, you know, eh, dispensing with the technocratic language, right? Dispensing of the knee jerk institutional defenses and find something that's more emotional and more evocative for people that make clear that these kind of positions are really radical and being really unconcerned about an awful lot of suffering, some of which will be visited on very, very sympathetic people.
Yeah, one thing about being in the opposition is that you don't need a global theory. You don't need to have kind of you it's good to think about for when you come back into power, but when you're opposing, you don't need all the answers. You can just say this one thing you're doing doesn't seem so good. We're and my sense is where part of the immigration thing that I just don't get is that I think where we've gone wrong generally, and some of this is why some legislation is so essential, that to a great extent because we have high levels of immigration right now, and we don't have enough immigration judges. So asylum is supposed to be this thing where you come to the country, you say, I'm here seeking asylum because I come under this, these rubrics. And you go before a judge, and the judge makes a decision. And if you've got a good argument, you are allowed to stay on some basis. And if you're not, you have to leave. But we've created this situation where you can't get in front of a judge for many years. And that has kind of broken the whole concept of asylum. It's not really asylum if you can pre your adjudication put down roots, have kids, become a part of a community. It's an unworkable situation, and I do think it is certainly the part of this that I agree with the. It's not a matter of agree. Where I agree we have a problem is that our our approach to how many immigrants the country should absorb at any given moment should not be left to the vagaries of not having enough immigration judges. That's just perverse. And I do think that that sense of, I mean, look, a lot of people are against immigration because they don't want the country to become less white. But that's not the entire spectrum. And I do think that's a big part of it because again, asylum has you have this weird kind of conversation happening where we're talking about, ending asylum. There's no more political asylum. And you have all the activists saying that is outrageous. It breaks the whole post World War II model. But why are we there? Again, we should have we should hire a ton of immigration judges so we can be adjudicating these on some kind of timely basis. I'm not saying suddenly everything's fine, but I do think that Biden, to some degree, because he couldn't get can't get legislation through and stuff, let that thing persist, and that's not workable politically. I don't think that is why some of the public discussion has shifted on immigration, because there is this sense, why can't we control this? Why is this? It doesn't make sense, and at a certain level, it does not make sense. And I know that I'm not, everybody talks about the immigration judges, but you know somehow that it people who advocate for not just a healthy amount of a kind of a robust amount of immigration, but also rights of immigrants. It's for us to kind of to deal with that issue. That's my. I think Biden lost, didn't get on top of that, and it hurt him terribly, hurt us terribly, hurt the Democrats terribly. I can't hear you. I think that's why I kept talking there.
I
Yep,
muted
got
for
it.
ambient noise. So before we wrap, we're going to talk about one of Trump's most embattled nominees who is somehow still hanging on, maybe seeing a reversal in fate even. This, of course, is Pete Hegseth, who, when we were recording last week, I mean, all but cooked, right? It was all
We
but
thought he might
official
be
that it
done
was
by the
over.
by the time people heard the episode.
Exactly. And so now we're recording this on our usual day, Wednesday, the week after. And Joni Ernst, who was kind of the tip of the spear for the anti-Hegseth movement, who had been subjected to a far right blitz, coming from all these big talking heads. And there were threats of primaries and recruitment of kind of top Iowa Republicans to shoot out veiled threats at her. That seems to have worked. She's now speaking more positively about him, in part because, hold for laughter, he said that he would prioritize sexual assault in the military, which that's
Hard
the
to win.
hand I want at the helm of that.
Well, it's also got to be sure what he means. right?
Right. Good
Given who's
point. Good point.
given who's talking.
No, which side of the problem, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um, then you've got Collins doing her usual kind of dithering, Murkowski being, well, I met with, kind of keeping the cards close to her vest. Um, and there has been some reporting that I think this one is not even necessarily about Trump as much as it is the kind of like manosphere MAGA world people who are, don't at all find sexual assault disqualifying, right? More the opposite, and are just, it's similar with Kavanaugh, right? Like, it is offensive that these men should kind of have to answer for this. Like, that in and of itself shows how the white man has so come under attack and all this. So he's kind of become an avatar for that. JD Vance is going hard in the paint for him. So now seems like there's at least a chance that he won't flame out before the confirmation at the very least.
That's the interesting thing about it, that there's, a lot of the newsletters were sort of saying, the sort of the comeback, that the vibes have changed, and they unquestionably have changed. And the other thing that I'm not sure all of our listeners know, Joni Ernst was a victim of sexual assault or some kind of I don't know the exact details, some kind of sexual assault, I believe, when she was in the military. She was also in combat, and Hegseth is against women being in combat. So, like, you know, she's there's kind of a lot of reasons why she might not be crazy about him, but they seem to have at least, like, she's not saying 100% she's going to vote for him, but she's definitely backing off any idea that she's the one that's going to sort of, like, lower the kibosh on him. And but it's like you said, that it's not clear he's going to make it, but they've gotten everybody to back off. Like, don't be trying to kind of put the final shiv in him. Let this go on. That kind of thing where, when just before Gates ended his nomination, usually in a situation like this, your ask is, let me go through the process. Let me have a hearing. Let me get my not day in court, but I mean, for Matt Gaetz, maybe day in court, but you know what I mean. Um, and so that's kind of where it is. And there is this. This is something that I think is worth thinking about. The Republican Senate and Trump and the sort of MAGA and the manosphere, they're trying to. There's this dance they're doing where clearly a lot of them don't want any of these people, but they also don't want to be the person who votes no, because they know what comes with that, the primary stuff, the being, kind of Liz Cheneyized and all that kind of stuff, and they're trying to just, if we just kind of keep our arms folded and don't say we're voting for him, maybe he'll just go away, and Matt Gaetz did go away, and we don't know how this is going to play out exactly.
Which is also why Ernst was important, because she's not Murkowski or Collins, right? Like, if she was the kind of heat shield for this, you
Yeah.
have more comfortable defectors kind of falling in line behind
Yeah.
her, in part because that would be, I mean, MAGA people don't feel this way, but for most people, that would be an unimpeachable stance, right? For the
Yeah.
credentials you just listed. Like, yeah, of course it makes sense that she wouldn't want this guy in charge.
And also, no one
Um,
calls her a rhino, which people absolutely call
exactly.
the other two.
She's a
Yeah.
lockstep Trump MAGA person, kind of a loyal foot soldier. That being said, people are still kind of categorizing Hegseth as, like, if you put all the nominees from most endangered to safe, he's still on that kind of first tier of most endangered. And I think that Tulsi Gabbard might kind of be up there with him, in no small part because of the shocking events that have unfolded in Syria and brought her weirdest baggage kind of right back into the spotlight. So, for listeners who kind of have forgotten, because she has been somewhat latent in the last few years. She used to be in the House and developed a really strange reputation for being an Assad fangirl, and this kind of led speculation, as far back as Hillary Clinton was saying it, that she's a Russian plant, because her fondness towards him was so odd, right? And it manifested in these, in ways she talked about him in public, but also really worrying stories. Like when she was in the House, she was on one of the national security committees, and they had a Syrian who fled and had kind of a trove of evidence of, the various ways that Assad had been tormenting and torturing his own people. And reportedly, apparently, both Republican and Democratic staffers were so worried about having her in this closed door meeting that they had the Syrian who fled wear a mask so he wouldn't be identifiable. You have a story about two little girls who were disfigured by the attacks of Assad on his own people, and she asked, "Well, how do you know it was him and not ISIS?" Like, there's a long, weird history of this. John Bolton has kind of come to the fore as the person who's like, "Listen, she's insane. You can't put someone who's at best a hopeless conspiracy theorist and at worst an active Russian spy in this position." So she hasn't really gotten a ton of attention yet, because as we discussed last pod, it's kind of going from nominee to nominee in terms of the scrutiny and the scandal and the deep attention, and we're still kind of in the Hegseth chapter right now. But you got to wonder if, the toppling of the Assad regime and having Syria kind of blast into domestic news is not going to re-up all the weirdness around her.
Yeah, it's a strange thing because in a lot of ways, I think that in a lot of ways, Hegseth is the easiest ask in a way, despite his all of his stuff. A lot of these Republicans don't care about that stuff. Like, whatever, you know. I mean, are we really going to make this a big deal when Trump's the president? I mean, come on. Uh, and I think a lot of sort of national security oriented Republicans can probably tell themselves, look, you're going to have a deputy. He's just some sort of bro idiot, whatever. Like, it's not great, but we'll kind of get through. Whereas Tulsi Gabbard, as you say, you're talking about putting her in charge of all the country's secrets, the person who sees everything. And there are a lot of people who really wonder what her relationships are. I mean, maybe Assad is not really relevant anymore, but Assad and Putin type people. So I I continue to be a little skeptical she's going to go through. And it's just weird because, again, in some ways, I think for your average Republican senator, the headlines, they don't like the headlines about Hegseth, but they're headlines that about things they don't really care that much about themselves. But I do think there's a number of those people who are kind of like, this Gabbard thing, man, I don't know. Like, that's not I so yeah, it's such a weird mix of things. It's hard to kind of say when it really, I mean, people are saying he's the most endangered, but clearly that's because he's in the hot seat now.
Hmm.
I'm not sure it's actually going to end up that way for the reasons that I said, and that you still have this kind of uh, wild card of that dance between the Republicans and Trump, where they're kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's let him have the process, and where they want Trump to sort of, it's like you're on a bad date and you want the person to get the message kind of thing, and that's but Trump doesn't want to get the message.
And I said this about it before, but with Hegseth particularly, it just doesn't feel to me like it's coming from Trump all that much, because we had the kind of leaking that he was already vetting DeSantis, and we know that he made calls on Gates and then Gates dropped out, which I think put him in this position of like, well, I'm not kind of putting my chits on the table again. This is his thing, how he loved to endorse in like non-competitive races so he could claim that he backed the winner. That's like
Hmm.
baked in, right? He doesn't like to lose in any sense of the word. So it'll be interesting, when it comes to Gabbard, who her literally being compromised is not like Gates or Hegseth about people who are just like wildly unfit to hold these offices because they are so personally odious and irresponsible. But with her, it's more kind of boring nuts and bolts. Like, she cannot hold this job, not because she like gets drunk and gropes women, but because she might be an
She might work for
agent
the
of
other
the Russian
side.
state. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so
it'll
crazy.
be,
It's so crazy.
and it's so, like everything else, you just have all this weird, like all these crosswinds. Cause then you also have, as you said before, like Trump is kind of more naturally allied with where she stands on these dictators than the Russian or the Republican establishment is. So, and we've seen, he successfully kind of wore down those old alliances in various ways, right? Like, this is part of how you could tell the gravity he has when a lot of these even Senate Republicans kind of turned on Ukraine, right? And stopped wanting to fund that. Like, that's a sea change in terms of where Republicans would have been even like a few years ago.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
that'll be kind of testing the extent to which he can set the agenda of like, no, 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 we are friends with like authoritarians. Now that's the new world order. That's how I'm kind of realigning the United States. That'll be like a big test for how successful he'll be in doing that.
Yeah, and I think just to conclude on the always the wild card with him is that there are many things he just doesn't care about. And so he could change on a dime, and it because there is a laziness, and there is a I mean, look, I he ran for president again because he was super pissed because he's super pissed about the Mueller stuff. He was angry that he lost the election, and he wanted to stay out of jail. Now, I think we know we know he's on the warpath about the things that he sees as adjacent to the Mueller investigation. He can now say he won another election. The jail thing seems pretty remote. So I do think there is a big part of him that is kind of paradoxically a little low energy, because I don't think he was actually running to do much of anything. He on this sort of like, deep state stuff and administrative state, he had a kind of an alliance of interest, a kind of a marriage of convenience for the sort of the hardcore ideological people. But he's already kind of done, he's kind of checked his boxes. So it remains unclear to me how much energy he has for a lot of this stuff. So that's, again, remains one of the big question marks hanging over the whole thing.
All right.
All right. Well, let me remind you, everybody, again, we have this live edition of the podcast, Washington, D.C., January 15th, Eaton Workshop. If you're a member, you'll be getting an email with information about purchasing tickets if you'd like to join us. That'll probably show up in your inbox beginning of next week, first half of next week, something like that. So keep an eye out. And I think
And
that's
for
all we.
non-members, the
Yeah.
tickets will be up for sale on the website as well.
Yes. As for non-members, we will have them there as well. So everybody gets to partake of the fun. And anything else we have for this episode?
That's all.
All right, later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen.